Chapter 769 Changes on Earth, 2. Ashton City Community Orphanage. The dimly lit candles within the chapel flickered continuously, casting an eerie glow over the interior. The alternating orange and black hues of the room created an unsettling atmosphere, one that was heightened by the silence within. The only sound that could be heard was the gentle whistling of the wind outside, which seemed to creep in through the cracks and crevices of the old building. Clank. As the minutes ticked by, the silence was suddenly broken by a loud clank. A certain door within the chapel burst open, and a nun rushed out from it. Oh, no, no, no. No. She had a panicked expression on her face, her eyes wide with fear. No, no, how can it be? There was a certain madness in her face as she muttered to herself in a voice barely above a whisper. Her words were barely coherent, as if she were speaking to someone who wasn't there. It must be a mistake. The nun's pace quickened as she moved across the chapel, her feet making little noise on the stone floor. No. 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 Her gaze was fixed on a certain statue, and as she drew closer, her expression grew even more desperate. With trembling hands, she clasped her hands together and fell to her knees. Thump. Protector. She whispered, her voice barely audible. Her eyes burned with reverence as she looked up at the statue, which towered over her from above. The statue was her faith, the embodiment of all that she held sacred. And yet, just moments before, she had felt her faith shaken. She wasn't sure why, but the feeling had been so strong that she couldn't ignore it. Believing that she had sinned in some way, she rushed toward the statue in order to amend her mistake. Crack. It was right when she was about to pray that a sharp sound shattered the quiet of the chapel. The nun's gaze shot to the statue, her eyes widening in horror. Cracks had formed on the outer shell of the statue, spiderwebbing out in all directions. The sight froze the nun, whose expression paled considerably. Protector, she whispered, her hoarse voice echoing within the empty chapel. Her eyes shook slightly as she felt her throat become dry, all semblance of energy leaving her aged body. Crack. Crack. More cracks formed on the statue, further shocking the nun, who simply gazed at the statue in utter shock. She found herself unable to move, and by the time a minute had passed, the statue was littered with cracks. It can't be. With each crack that formed on the statue, the more the nun's expression changed. It was as if the statue were a living being, and the nun could sense its pain. Wobble. No. She cried out, rushing toward the statue. She could feel that it was soon going to fall. No. She hugged the statue, trying her best to stop it from falling. She was desperate. The statue represented her faith, her beliefs, and her very being. If it broke apart, so would she. She couldn't allow it to happen. But. No. See, crack. It was a crack like the many others that had littered the statue, but once this crack formed, the entire structure of the statue collapsed. No. Rumble. Over 1,000 different pieces crumbled down, unable to remain in a single form anymore. No. The nun screamed, watching the statue before her eyes collapse. What was even worse was the fact that the many pieces of rock directly crashed onto her, burying her beneath the rubble. Her scream didn't last for long, and silence returned to the chapel. The only part of the nun that wasn't buried was her hand, which was outstretched to the side as if pleading for help. One that would never come. Om, om, om. Several blue orbs appeared following the collapse of the statue. They were the size of a marble, and they levitated right above where the statue used to be. As the blue orbs hovered above the shattered remains of the statue, their glow illuminated the chapel, casting an eerie light on the walls and pews. The orbs pulsed with otherworldly energy as if they were alive and searching for something. Suddenly, the orbs began to spin around each other, their blue light intensifying with each rotation. They moved faster and faster, creating a vortex of energy that crackled with the wind. The air in the chapel grew thick with tension, as if something significant was about to happen. The nun's body lay buried under the rubble, but even in death, she seemed to be aware of the strange events unfolding around her. Swoosh! 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 With a final burst of light, the orbs shot away from the statue, streaking through the air like shooting stars. They passed through the walls of the chapel as if they were not there, disappearing into the night. The moment the orbs vanished, the chapel was plunged into silence once more. Swoosh! The candles flickered and went out, leaving the chapel shrouded in blackness. But the darkness was not the only thing that engulfed the chapel. As the orbs disappeared, a deep rumbling sound filled the air, and the ground beneath the chapel began to shake violently. Rumble! Rumble! The clanking sound echoed through the chapel once more, growing louder and more insistent. The walls began to crack and crumble, and the pews were tossed about like twigs in a storm. The roof of the chapel began to cave in, and debris rained down upon the shattered remains of the statue. Crash! The chapel collapsed. Union Tower, top floor. Octavius sat in his high-backed chair, looking calm and serene as he flipped through the papers that lay scattered in front of him. Flip! Flip! His long, slender fingers delicately turned the pages as he studied each one with a languid gaze. There was no hint of expression on his face, and his features remained blank as he sifted through the documents. Suddenly, his brows furrowed as he sensed something out of place. His eyes, usually calm and hazy, flicked toward the window behind him, and his expression shifted slightly. Rising to his feet, he approached the window and looked out at the sky. A large crack had appeared, and it was rapidly expanding. What's going on? Octavius murmured to himself, his voice low and unusually grave. He stepped closer to the window, peering at it intently as he tried to discern what was happening. But before he could get any closer, the crack widened even further, revealing a shocking sight. A tangible wave of mana. Octavius felt his body freeze in place as the wave crashed down around him. It was as though he was standing on the shore of the ocean, watching as a powerful wave came crashing down on the sand. But this was different. The wave seemed to be unable to affect the surroundings, appearing more like a projection than anything else. Swoosh! The mana splashed everywhere, washing over the earth like a giant wave. Octavius felt his own mana levels surge, increasing rapidly and without warning. He could feel himself getting closer and closer to the threshold of SSS-, just one step away from the pinnacle of power. But then, out of nowhere, a blue orb appeared in front of him. Thing. It hurtled towards him with a speed that he couldn't react to, and before he could even attempt to dodge, it slammed into his forehead with a jarring impact. Ugh! Octavius grunted, his head recoiling backward as he tried to process what had just happened. As he hung in the air, the space around him began to shift and fluctuate wildly. Memories flooded his mind, and a pain that he thought he had long since buried started to resurface in his chest. Ah! He gasped for air, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he tried to keep his composure. Suddenly, his eyes cleared, and forgotten feelings began to rise up within him. His expression changed rapidly, alternating between a smile, a frown, and tears that threatened to spill down his cheeks. In just a few seconds, he went through a myriad of emotions before finally settling on a smile that was accompanied by tears. He gazed at his hands, feeling a sense of exhilaration that he had never experienced before. All of a sudden, his body trembled, and so did his mouth as he silently mumbled to himself. I'm free. Apartment 1576. Currently, Liam's expression was utterly solemn. If anyone saw the expression on Liam's face, they would be utterly astounded, as they had never before witnessed such uncommon gravity from him. His brows knit together even more tightly, and he tightened his jaw. It seemed as though the more time that went by, the more serious his expression became. The scowl on his face transformed into a troubled one as he massaged his forehead. A massive door made of metal was there in front of him. The source of his problem, a miniature keypad that one would use to enter their passcode located on the handle of the door. Should I just destroy it? He felt tempted. Lowering his hand, he stared at his hand, which was vibrating constantly. Moving the hand closer to the door, it passed through it for just an inch before he stopped himself. Maybe not. It had been close to 3 hours since he stood outside of his apartment, and no matter how many times he pressed the code, the door would not open for him. This presented a bit of a problem for him since he needed to use the restroom. What useless piece of paper. The fact that he had the key code written down in his wallet was the most vexing aspect of the matter. Yet, for some strange reason, it didn't seem to be working. Is the door faulty? There could be no other explanation. It had to be that. I think it's best if I call someone. He rummaged through his pocket in an attempt to find his phone. When he went to retrieve his phone, the furrows between his brows deepened further. Is this my phone? It was a pink phone covered in a variety of different sized heart stickers. At first glance, it didn't seem like his phone, however, he could not quite remember how his phone looked. Perhaps, he had been in a phase when he bought the phone. It's not too bad. He convinced himself that it wasn't as bad as it looked. Rather, the more he looked at it, the more he found himself liking it, and he soon convinced himself it was indeed his phone. He tapped the screen. Now. The moment he caught a glimpse of the wallpaper on the phone, his face stiffened on the spot. It was a photograph of Ren's back. The fuck? His entire body began to shake, and he came dangerously close to hurling the phone across the room. He was now confident that whatever he was holding wasn't his phone. Swoosh! Whose phone is th Bach? Right when he was trying to determine what to do with the phone, a bluish orb materialized out of thin air and stabbed Liam in the head. Almost instantaneously after that, his head jerked back, and he stumbled forward a few steps. What was that? He came to a stop just as his back was turned to the wall, and he looked around him in disbelief. Did someone sneak up on him unexpectedly? Huh? Suddenly, as he looked at the phone while blinking his eyes a few times and staring at it, memories came flooding back into his head. He finally knew who this phone belonged to. It belonged to Leopold's daughter. Not only that. That's the wrong apartment. He also realized he was in the wrong apartment. It wasn't the one in front of him that belonged to him, rather, it was the one that was 2 doors down from it. I see. He put the phone back and walked toward his apartment, but just as he had taken a couple of steps, he froze on the spot. Hold on a second. His eyes opened wide, and his head snapped up. My memories. Chapter 770 Changes on Earth, 3. What? Really? That foo. With what was happening outside at the moment, it wasn't hard to convince Emma that her father had gone out to check on the situation. Why did he just leave without telling me anything? He hasn't changed at all. She grumbled several times, but in the end, she gave up and accepted the situation. It was good that she did. As I listened to her mutter and groan about her father's sudden disappearance, I felt a pang of guilt rise up inside of me. It wasn't so much from the fact that I, or the other me, had killed Waylon, but rather from the fact that now the 2 people whom she cared for the most had both passed away. Her life. It was really pitiful when one thought about it. Should I tell her the truth later, or should I just change her memories? I didn't think the second option was feasible. Whether or not I made an effort to conceal the information from her, she was going to find out about her father's disappearance in one way or another. How should I tell her the news? That was the biggest problem. I couldn't just tell her that her father was someone known as the protector of the seat of diligence and was the one responsible for the deaths of millions of humans. He was also the same person who murdered her mother once he realized she was no longer of any use to him, and the only reason he kept her close to him was because of her talent, which was worth nurturing. She always did seem to lag a bit behind the others. I guess he must have slowed down her path forward on purpose. Ugh! I groaned and ruffled my hair. The situation was more troublesome than I anticipated. If only Kevin was here. He was the one who was good at handling these types of matters. What are you going to do now? Overhearing Emma's voice, I turned to look at her. Her expression seemed to have recovered, and her eyes were on me. I pursed my lips. I think I'll go back. I got what I wanted already. Oh, I see. Emma nodded her head. Do you want me to follow you out? No, it's okay. I shook my head, refusing her offer. To be honest, I'd rather not interact with her at the moment. I found myself struggling to think of how to break the news of her father's passing to her. In the end, I chose to leave and think of the solution later. I'm sure I can think of a way. My expectations weren't very high. All right then. I won't see you out. We parted ways not long after that, Emma and I both. After reappearing right in front of her mansion, I turned around and looked back at it while sighing. This really was troublesome. You're back. When I got back home, the first person I saw was Amanda. She seemed happy to see me. She had her hair pulled back into a ponytail and wore a nice apron. Seeing her like this brought a nice change. Especially after what I just went through. Are you cooking something? Emichum. Amanda nodded her head. Though her expression didn't give it away, I could tell that she seemed rather excited. I knew her long enough to know how she felt, despite not showing it outwardly. That being said, you don't seem to be surprised by what happened outside. Oh, that? Amanda's body paused. When she turned her head cocked a little. I was shocked at first, and I tried to call you several times, but you didn't answer. You did. I took out my phone and noticed several missed calls. I smiled wryly at the sight. This was my bad. What happened after that? Nothing much. With a little shrug of her shoulders, Amanda patted her hand on her apron. I figured you were busy since you're the Alliance head. That's fair. After going into the kitchen, Amanda returned with a large cake in her hands. It was not very big, about the size of a football, and it appeared to be piled high with whipped cream. My eyes lit up at the sight, and I sat down on the sofa. I liked cakes. Rubbing my hands together, I leaned back on the sofa. Pondering over something, I turned my attention back toward Amanda. Still, that doesn't explain why you don't seem surprised by it. Well, I've seen far more shocking things. Amanda looked at me and smiled. When I noticed that what was happening was harmless and the mana density increased, I went back to making the cake. She suddenly pursed her lips, and her brows furrowed. I almost burned it because of it. She seemed rather resentful at that fact. Oh. I nodded my head and took a small slice of the cake. The taste was rather good. She had come a long way from the times when she would add far too much cinnamon to her food. It was very sweet. You've improv. I stopped halfway through my sentence. Looking at Amanda's plate, which was filled to the brim with cake, my mouth twitched. This girl. Noticing my gaze, Amanda brought her spoon to my mouth. You want some? I'm good. I still have my own piece. Oh. Amanda looked at my plate and frowned. Is that enough for you? You don't think? My size was what someone would call normal. In comparison to hers, which practically filled the entire plate, it looked like nothing. Just when did she turn into such a glutton, and where did all of that food go? When I looked at Amanda, she seemed to be as fit as ever. Rather, it seemed that she had lost a little bit of weight. What's going on? Hold up. Amanda extended her hand toward my mouth and pressed her finger against the side of my lips. She brought her finger, which was now filled with cream, to her mouth after tracing it down the side of my lips. I looked at her in complete bewilderment, and as if she could read my mind, Amanda frowned and reprimanded me. Eat your food. It's rude to look at others while eating. All right. Letting out a sigh, I took a bite of the cake. For some reason, it tasted a lot more bitter. Do you resent me? It was a question that came abruptly, and I had a hard time processing it. I had just hopped on to visit my family and saw my dad sitting on the sofa with the lights turned off. Apparently, Nola and Mom had gone outside together. I don't get what you mean. Resent you? Why would I ever resent you? I sat myself down on the sofa and looked directly into my father's eyes. He stared back at me, and despite my best efforts, I couldn't quite make out what he was thinking. He was one of the few people I could never find myself able to read. I'm sure you know this, but I find it very hard to express myself. It's something I've been trying to work on for quite a long time, and despite my efforts, I still struggle with it. I quietly listened to my father's words. Indeed, he wasn't one to express his emotions often. He was sort of like how Amanda was at first. Perhaps it was because of him that I felt so comfortable around her. I know, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. He didn't need to express himself for me to understand that he cared for me. His actions spoke louder than his words. The fact that they were willing to shoulder such debts just for me to enter the lock was enough to make me understand. I'm glad you feel that way. I may not express it, but I am truly happy with who you have become. I'm a little embarrassed that I wasn't able to do better, but when I say that I'm proud of what you've achieved, I mean it. He silently smiled, and rummaging through his pocket, he took out a certain something and handed it to me. What's this? Happy birthday. I looked up in surprise. Birthday. Today was my birthday. Wait, was that why Amanda made a cake today? Click. The lights turned on, and a few faces I was familiar with showed up all of a sudden. Happy birthday. Following the strategist's orders, members of the Lust clan will be heading in the Dwarven Portal's direction. To reiterate, members of the Lust clan should travel in the northwestern direction toward where Dwarven Portal is located. A raspy voice echoed within the mind of every demon within the Idoania. Head toward the Dwarven Portal. Spurt. Tearing her gaze away from the elf in front of her, who slumped shortly after, Angelica's head raised up. She scowled when she heard the command, but when she turned her head and saw everyone else in her clan flying in the air and listening to the command, she had no choice but to do the same. How odd. Angelica's brows furrowed as she observed her clansmen moving about without making a great deal of commotion. It was the first time she had seen members of her clan be this obedient, and she could only speculate that it was because of this so-called strategist. To be completely honest, she did not know very much about him. She only knew two things about him: one, that he was someone whom the Demon King had personally recruited, and two, that their record was impeccable, with not a single loss under their name. Not only that, but some rumors had it that even the clan chiefs respected him. This was not something that she could ignore, and it baffled Angelica. The fact that he had built his reputation over the course of a few years was the most surprising aspect of this matter. It served as further evidence of the formidable nature of the person who acted as this strategist. I should try to report this to Ren when I return. She had a great deal of information that she needed to impart to him. During her time in the clan, she became embroiled in a number of political disputes and came to learn a lot of things. If not for the war, things would have been. Should I be happy or annoyed by the war? She was a demon, but after coming back home, she was more than certain that her decision to join Ren was the right one. There you are. Angelica turned around just as she heard a voice coming from behind her. When she turned her head, she was confronted by the person she had hoped to avoid seeing the most. Why are you following me? Didn't I tell you before? The answer is no. Angelica's facial expression distorted. She was becoming more and more annoyed by his antics. It was obvious that all he cared about was the position he'd gain after marrying her due to the influence her mother held, and Angelica understood this. The fact that he didn't even try to conceal his intentions was what made Angelica loathe him even further. It's fine if you refuse. In the end, it's not up to you. The area around the two of them distorted, and at the same instant, both of them came to a stop. When she looked up ahead, she saw a crack form in the air above her that slowly expanded to reveal over 10 different dwarves wearing large suits that towered over her figure. They were all holding a device in their hands, and it was pointed in their direction. The air began to warp right at the very tip of the device, and Angelica's expression changed drastically. Whying. 10 large beams headed her way. Shit. Chapter 771 Changes on Earth, 4. Alliance Headquarters. There's a sudden situation. This is the perfect time to strike the demons. I have just been informed that our forces and the demons in Idoania have engaged in full-scale warfare against one another. Even though there have been no requests for additional support, the situation appears to be rather grim. The Demon King is currently engaged in combat with the leaders of our race. The mana on this planet also seem to have drastically increased. Do you have any idea of what happened, Ren? One at a time, please. I massaged my head while I stared at the 3 projections in front of me. They were Gervis, Malin, and Brutus. The heads of the 3 races on Earth. The 3 of them had different facial expressions at the moment and were talking over one another, but I roughly understood what had occurred. I looked at Malin. So you're saying a war broke out on this planet called Idoania and that the Demon King is currently fighting against all of your race leaders? That's correct. Malin, who was hidden behind the holographic projection, nodded her head. After staring at her for what seemed like an eternity, I eventually leaned against the back of my chair. I had a sudden thought. There are 7 protectors, but as far as I can tell, there is only one on Earth. If I'm not mistaken, then it seems highly likely that the race leaders of the 3 different races are the other protectors, right? It was a possibility. If not, why would Jezebeth opt to move to them before heading down to Earth? The more I thought about it, the more obvious it seemed. In the same manner, as on Earth, the protectors kept a close eye on the 3 other races in order to ensure that they remained in their proper place. Clean up and oppress those who have talent. Their surveillance wasn't something that was exclusive to human beings alone, but it did affect the other races as well. It was also abundantly clear that the protectors placed a higher priority on the other races than they did on us, as evidenced by the fact that there was only one protector watching over us as opposed to the 2 others for each race. Not that I blamed them. After all, mana was something that humans had only very recently begun to interact with. In addition, our population was noticeably lower than theirs. It only made sense. I turned to look at Gervis. Yes, the mana in the atmosphere did indeed become a lot denser. I don't know why, but I've received several reports from our side that many have broken through because of it. Oh? Is Octavius one of them? Yes. I replied with a short nod. Not even a day after my other self killed Waylon, a large phenomenon swept over the city, and Octavius broke through to SSS-rank. The news of his breakthrough was met with a great deal of enthusiasm, and some news articles even suggested that he ought to take the reins as leader of the Alliance in light of his recent success. If only they knew. He's broken through to the next rank, and so have several other people. What about you? Same for us. Gervis heartily laughed. With Inferno gone, everything has been going quite smoothly for us. After the mana density rose, almost all of us experienced a large increase in our powers. Although I don't know what brought about this change, I'm all in for it. That's nice to hear. I gave him a friendly smile before turning my attention to Brutus. Even though he was hidden behind a projection, I was still able to feel his breath from where I was seated. With his sharp eyes focused on me, I sighed. You want to take advantage of this opportunity to attack the demons? Yes. The residual demonic energy in the atmosphere has become noticeably less potent as a result of the significant increase in mana density that has recently taken place. Even though we orcs didn't go through any of what you humans did, we didn't lose any strength, in contrast to the demons. If we take advantage of this opportunity, we will be able to eradicate all of the demons at once. His words had some reason behind them. If there were ever a better time to launch an assault, that time would be now. Not only did a good number of us become stronger, but because the mana was so concentrated, the demons were put in a position where they were at a disadvantage. Especially since the mana compressors needed to be tuned in order to convert the denser mana that had entered the atmosphere. There was only one problem with this situation. I looked toward the three of them, who were looking at me with expectant eyes. It seemed like they had already discussed the matter beforehand and were only waiting for my decision. I massaged the bottom of my chin and muttered my thoughts. We just came off a pretty big war, and if we suddenly get into another war right now, the people will start to riot. The situation is rather sensitive. Even though I couldn't say for certain that this was the case, it was safe to assume that the general populace would be anything but pleased with the news that another war was going to be declared. I was already able to picture all of the articles that would be written about me, calling me a war-hungry tyrant and other such things. Not that I cared. I've seen much worse things said about me in the media, and I've become somewhat desensitized to it all. As a matter of fact, I found them to be rather humorous. The vast majority of the time, all I would do to have a good laugh would be look at the news. Ren, we know that you've just gone through a war and that you're currently recuperating and mourning the losses, but this isn't an opportunity that can be wasted. There's no better time to strike now, and honestly, since we're the ones attacking, it shouldn't matter whether the citizens are happy or not. They won't be affected by all of this. In response to Gervis's statement, I tilted my head back to take a look at the other two. From the looks on their faces, it appeared as though they were all on the same page. I realized that I was the only one who held a contrasting viewpoint, and I adjusted the position of my chair accordingly. My office was completely silent for a brief period of time, as no one spoke at any point. I turned on the chip in my head and rapidly drummed my fingers across the surface of the wooden desk. Well over 100 distinct scenarios began playing over and over again in my head, and I went through each and every one of them very carefully, analyzing the benefits and drawbacks of each one. As the leader of the Alliance, I had many things to consider, and knowing the scope of the attack, I knew I couldn't go alone with my mercenary unit. It went without saying that I needed to bring most of the human domain's forces. What I needed to take into consideration was: who should be left behind to defend the domain in the event that the demons decide to launch an assault when the situation deteriorates? Who to bring alongside me? Whether there was a trap set up by the demons. What the citizens would think of the situation and how to calm down the panic and riots that may ensue from the decision. When it came time to make a decision, there were a lot of factors that I needed to take into consideration, and just thinking about all of those factors made my head throb in pain. Thankfully, with the aid of the chip, I was soon able to come up with a decision. I let out a long breath. I can already tell that this is going to be a pain in the ass. But what wasn't? At this point, everything was a pain in the ass. Literally. So, have you made your decision? Malin's pearl-like voice reverberated through my office, and I looked at her. Staring at her for a good couple of seconds, I nodded my head. Yeah. I stood up from my seat. Let's get ready for war. Here. What's this? Raising my head to stare at Ryan, my gaze fell on the small bottle he placed over my desk. Ryan abruptly entered the room and placed a small bottle on my table as I was preparing a series of documents regarding the upcoming war for a general assembly with all the rankers present. This is the thing you asked me to analyze and replicate. With a little help from Melissa, we were able to alter its properties a bit. Faint recollections of a conversation I had a while back started to surface in my mind, and my eyes lit up. Isn't this? Yup. Ryan smiled. It's the serum used to create the super soldiers from the monolith. I figured you'd want to know about this. You're damn right. I picked up the bottle and carefully examined the liquid contained within. It was clear and resembled water, and as I shook the bottle from side to side, I observed how the liquid mirrored my movements and moved in tandem with the movement of the bottle. Rather smooth. Unlike the serum I took, which was rather viscous, this substance was rather smooth. How are the effects? Pretty good. If you inject it into someone, they'll follow your commands, but in a limited manner since it takes several dosages to completely take control over them. Recalling something, Ryan's brows jumped up. Ah, right. They also apparently work on demons and those from the other races. Good. Pleased with what I was hearing, I slid the potion over the desk. Ryan looked at me with a confused look. Don't you want it? I worked quite hard for it. I'm good. I shook my head while carefully observing the serum. While it was indeed good, I had no use for it. Memory manipulation was just as good, if not better. You keep it. I'm sure it'll come in handy, eventually. Sure. With a skeptical look, Ryan took the serum away. With some hesitation, he looked at me again before slowly putting it away. Are you sure you don't want it? Sure. Okay then. After storing the serum, Ryan placed another object on the desk. It resembled a tooth, and I was taken aback. This is. With a proud smile, Ryan nudged the tooth forward with his finger. A dimensional space. Upon closer inspection, it was indeed a dimensional space. Fiddling with it, I was surprised to see that the space within it was quite large. What is this for? Isn't it obvious? Ryan placed the dimensional space directly in his mouth and clenched his teeth multiple times. The sound of his teeth grinding together rang throughout the room. An emergency dimensional space. You know, just in case something happens. Oh. That. It was actually quite a neat invention. Scanning him with my eyes, I really couldn't detect the dimensional space inside of him. That was rather surprising. If I had back in my monolith days. I could only sigh while thinking about the past. Not bad. It really was a useful tool. Is there anything else that you want to report to me? Yes. Ryan suddenly smacked his hand on his forehead. The assembly is full, and you're going to be late if you stay here any longer. I abruptly stood up from my seat. Yufu, Chapter 772, Invading the Demon Domain, 1. I know it's sudden, but this is the best time to strike. The demon domain was the largest of the 5 domains that inhabited the surface of the planet. Although the human domain wasn't particularly small, the fact that mountains made up the majority of its land made it possible to argue that it was the smallest. There were several large known cities within the demon domain: Ramlot, Plintus, Kumza, and Hamsala. According to the information that I obtained from the others, that location served as the primary residence for the principal leaders of the demons. It would appear that each of them was protected by a prince-ranked demon, and the strength of their armies was nothing to scoff at. In fact, the full extent of their forces wasn't fully known by the 3 races, hence why ample preparation needed to be made beforehand. Currently, we have been assigned the task of invading the city of Plintus. I paused, taking in all of the looks that were being directed in my direction. The auditorium was packed, and countless gazes were fixed on me. The aura that each one of them contained was nothing to scoff at, with the lowest level being guest rank. I would estimate that there were at least several thousand individuals in the auditorium. All of whom were looking at me with intense stares. They were the strongest people that remained, and their gazes didn't seem all that pleased with the sudden announcement. Having anticipated such a reaction, I did not mind their hostile expression and continued. Satellite imaging has been blocked due to the barrier that presides over the city, but from estimates, it's about the size of Ashton City. Several of the spies that we have planted have confirmed this with me, and a large mana compressor resides in the middle of the city. Our goal is to get rid of it. I paused, staring at the map in front of me carefully. So long as we manage to get rid of the mana compressor, then our mission can be said to be done. I then discarded the map and turned my attention to the audience. So, that was honestly all that I needed to say. What was important was how they would take in what I had said. What I was met with was absolute silence. I could tell from their expressions that they had numerous questions for me, so I nodded my head in response. If you have any questions, you can raise your hand, and I'll do my best at an swoosh. 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 My mouth twitched, and a wave of hands rose before I could finish my sentence. This might take a lot more time than I anticipated. You had a hard time. You think? I had the urge to give Ryan a swift smack on the crown of his head. Especially considering the fact that he was grinning like a fool and appeared to take pleasure in my misfortune while he did so. What happened to the obedient Ryan that I once used to know? TSK, teens. I don't get why you seem to be enjoying yourself. You should know that your workload just quadrupled because of what we're going to do. Ugh. Ryan's face fell at my words. It was now my turn to smirk. Not laughing anymore, are you? No, like, run. You know I'll die at this rate. You won't. I shook my head. You're a teen. At an age where sleep won't matter, so just work for me. At his age, I used to only sleep 6 hours a day. And now, I slept 3. Maybe he's having it too easy. No, you've got that part wrong. It's because I'm a teen that I need to sleep. I'm still growing. You forgot what day and age we're in. Just drink a couple of potions, and you'll be fine. No. Ren, you can't do this to me. Small Snake could do it, so why can't you? My workload is even greater than what he had back then. Have mercy. No. I shook my head and made my way toward the exit of the auditorium. I was obviously joking about letting him do all the work by himself. It was a lot of work, and while he could probably do it by himself, I didn't want him to die early. I planned on getting a few people to help him out. I wonder if he'll be happy to know that he's soon going to be the boss of someone. My mind flashed to a picture of him grinning broadly from ear to ear, but I forced the image out of my head as quickly as it had entered it. It wasn't something worth remembering. Well, at least I'm glad my worries were unfounded. All in all, although most people were dismayed by the sudden news of a new war, they all somehow managed to understand where I was coming from. The demons were a big threat, and since this was the best time to attack them, most of them agreed, albeit unwillingly. Ren, get ready. Approaching the exit, I heard Ryan's words, and I braced myself. I put my hand on the door handle and opened it, and as soon as I did, I saw a flash of light before my eyes. Click. 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 The clicking sound of camera shutters reverberated throughout, and I found myself surrounded by reporters. Alliance Head, can you please explain to us the situation? What's going on, Alliance Head? Are we going to another war when we just finished one? Alliance Head, don't you think the time is a bit too premature? We still haven't recovered from the losses of the war with the monolith. What makes you think that we are ready for another war? Alliance Head. Alliance Head. I was immediately bombarded with more than a dozen questions, and dozens of reporters crowded the area I was in, shoving their microphones toward my mouth in an attempt to get a response from me. My expression changed to one of displeasure, and I found myself coughing once. Cough. The shutters stopped, and so did the questions. Everyone looked at me with frozen expressions, and I silently let out a sigh. Moving closer to one of the mics, I spoke. I know you are all curious about the upcoming war, but don't be. While it is true that this war is going to be even harder than the one against the monolith, you should all also know that we're all a lot stronger than before. A formal answer. One benefiting the Alliance head. I had trained for this for the past few days. With the mana density increasing exponentially, our forces have become stronger and so have our allies. The demons, on the other hand, have gotten weaker. If there's a better time to attack the demons, then it is now. I looked directly at one of the cameras pointed at me. There were a lot of things that I wanted to say at that moment, but when I gazed at the cameras, I realized that any of the words I'd say would not have any impact on what the people would think. Thus, I only said 2 words. So troublesome. Unfortunately, they ended up being the wrong words as I revealed my inner thoughts. Smack. It was faint, but I definitely heard Ryan smacking his forehead with his hand. I will relay the information to them. Don't worry. The room was dark, the only source of light was a single flickering candle on the table in the center of the room. Its weak light cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the air was thick with the scent of smoke and something else, something rotten. The plush chairs that surrounded the table were empty, and the room was silent, save for the occasional creaking of the old wooden floorboards. Swoosh! Swoosh! The silence was broken by the sound of something brushing against the curtains that covered the windows. Suddenly, several figures appeared within the room, each one taking a seat at the table, eyeing the others grimly. They were all dressed in dark, hooded robes that concealed their identities, and their eyes glowed with a red light. There was a mix of emotions in the room, anger, greed, and a sense of power that only came from those belonging to different clans. Thud. Time ticked by, and by the time the 10th figure appeared, the meeting commenced. A tall and imposing figure dressed in black stood at the head of the table. It looks like we're all here, he said in a deep, rumbling voice. I'm sure you all know why I've decided to gather all of you here today. The other demons leaned forward, their eyes glittering in the dim light. As you all are probably aware of, the demon continued, those cowards have decided to launch an attack against us. Judging from how they are preparing, they will all each attack one of the main cities and will be coming at us at full force. The demon's gaze suddenly turned fierce. We don't want that, do we? There were murmurs of agreement around the table as each demon nodded its head in agreement. None of them wanted to be invaded, especially in a situation where the demonic energy was thinner. We must be careful. The demon went on. We must each be willing to make sacrifices, to put aside our individual ambitions in service of a greater cause. But I believe that there's an opportunity hidden within this crisis. The demon suddenly smiled, revealing a set of pearly teeth. I've just received news that reinforcements will come to aid us soon. So long as we can hold out for a bit, we can get rid of all 4 races at once. The demon's eyes widened at this news, and a sense of excitement and anticipation filled the air. But we must be careful. We cannot let our guard down, even for a moment. These attacks will be brutal, and we must be prepared for anything. The demons nodded their heads in agreement, and the room fell silent once again. The only sound was the flickering of the candle on the table, casting its weak light on the demons' faces. In light of that fact, not all hope is lost. I've actually procured a nice artifact from the higher demons. A very interesting one at that. Everyone leaned forward, grimly waiting for his next words, and they didn't disappoint as their faces twisted with smiles filled with malice. The meeting went on for the next couple of hours until it soon came to a close, and as it did, the demons rose from their seats, each one disappearing into the shadows. Their disappearance left the room empty once again, save for the single candle, its light flickering in the darkness. Chapter 773 Invading the Demon Domain, 2. Planet Idoania. Boom. The sound of metal clashing against the ground reverberated through the battlefield as Angelica panted heavily. She stared at the bulky figure lying beneath her, trying to catch her breath. Ha, ha. This is too much. She tirelessly muttered to herself. Angelica's eyes shot up as she saw over a dozen other dwarves approaching her. Her face paled at the sight, knowing that she was outnumbered and outmatched. She was only a Maquis-ranked demon, and while it was considered strong, it wasn't anything noteworthy in the grand scheme of the battlefield. She had already taken over a couple of dozen dwarves, but she was almost out of energy at the moment. Fuck. Her grip tightened around her weapon as she prepared to face her adversaries, but she knew that it was only a matter of time before she would be overwhelmed. She was barely holding on. Boom. A beam of light headed in her direction. It was so fast that she had a hard time avoiding it. Ah, guy. The impact of the beam was so powerful that half of her arm blew off at that moment, causing her to let out a frustrated cry and glare at the dwarf responsible for her injury. With a pale face, her arm wiggled and slowly regenerated itself. Shit. Angelica cursed under her breath as she looked around and noticed that she was surrounded. Where did all that arrogance go from before? When she looked down, and her gaze paused on her so-called prospective fiancé, she could only sigh in disgust. He had only lasted a couple of minutes before dying. She knew that she was in deep trouble, and her expression crumbled. So much for this strategist being great. She thought to herself. They had clearly fallen into a trap intricately set up by the dwarves. When she looked around and noticed that the situation was like this for the other demons too, she knew that it wasn't just her that had fallen for the scheme. It was clear to her that the strategist was at fault for this predicament. Fuck it, whatever. She could only curse another time, knowing that there was no use cursing the strategist's incompetence at this point. Staring at the dwarves that were surrounding her and loading their artifacts, she channeled all of the demonic energy within her body. Her eyes started to glow a red hue as she prepared to make her last stand. Put down your weapons. Her soft voice echoed within the surroundings and traveled through the ears of each and one of the dwarves in front of her. For a split second, the dwarves' movements halted, and Angelica took advantage of that moment. Fwop! She flapped her wings and made a dash upward, the only area that wasn't covered. But unfortunately, the dwarf's reaction was a tad bit faster than she had anticipated. Just as her wings flapped, a huge net was cast above her, trapping her completely. Angelica tried to pass through the net, but it proved to be an impossible task as the net stretched and absorbed her attack. No, shit. She let out a frustrated cry, finally feeling despair. She knew at this moment that there was no way out for her. Shoot her. The dwarves yelled, aiming their weapons at her. It's over. Angelica stared at the barrel of the artifacts, knowing that it was over for her. She didn't close her eyes and simply stared at the artifact, wanting to see what would kill her. Whoom! The beam shot and approached Angelica, and there was only one thought in her mind. It looks like the sun. Bright and large. It wasn't such a bad sight. Darkness completely overtook her vision shortly after, but who? For some strange reason, she felt no pain, and light soon returned to her vision. Her vision hadn't yet fully cleared, but what she managed to catch a glimpse of upon opening her eyes was a flock of pink hair. Reinforcements. Swoosh! Swoosh! The dense and lush canopy of towering trees overhead created a natural fortress, blocking out most of the sunlight and casting a murky green light that filtered through the twisted branches. The air was thick with the sweet scent of decay and damp earth. Follow closely. The forest floor was a tangled mess of roots, vines, and fallen leaves that crunch and rustle underfoot. Squish! The ground was soft and spongy, and it felt as though every step was filled with danger, sinking into the mire beneath. Keep moving, we're almost there. Make sure to hide your presence as best as you can. In the distance, the twisted silhouettes of gnarled trees clawed at the sky, their blackened limbs reaching out like skeletal fingers. The dense foliage and underbrush made it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction, adding to the sense of disorientation and claustrophobia. This is the right way, right? It is, but just keep moving for now. As we moved deeper into the forest, the trees grew thicker and closer together until their trunks were so close that you could reach out and touch them. Stop here for a moment. I raised my hand, and everyone stopped at my signal. Immediately, everything turned silent. The silence was deafening, and the only sounds I could hear were the occasional rustle of leaves under a breeze that lingered in the air. The stillness was oppressive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. They're probably using an artifact. It was the only explanation since I could feel it with my senses. There was no one near us at the moment. Take this chance to rest, I'll get in contact with the other teams. Following that, I brought my watch to my mouth and spoke. What's the current situation? Have you all reached your spot? Affirmative. We're currently waiting for orders. Not yet, we'll be there soon. We have just arrived. We see the spot, we're almost there. A couple of minutes at most. A wave of messages reached my ears, and I nodded my head comfortably. Everything so far was proceeding smoothly. This is good. Although everything was going smoothly so far, I didn't let my guard down. With the unsettling feeling that I was being watched, I knew that the demons weren't completely unaware of our movements. In fact, they most probably already knew where we were and were planning on counterattacking. Not that I'd let them. Stay put where you are. Keep your guard up. I reminded the others on my watch before shifting my attention toward my group. It was a rather small group comprised of Amanda, Jean, Emma, and Liam. I thought about bringing Melissa, but considering the gravity of the situation, I decided to leave her in Ashton City, which, well, she was all in for. The thought made me sigh, and I turned to look at the others behind me. Their expression was rather normal, but I could tell that Emma was nervous. Compared to the others, she was practically the weakest and not by a close margin. I tore my gaze away from her and looked at the group. Let's go sneak into the city and do a proper check of the city before we decide to attack. I paused and looked toward the distance, where I could see the faint outline of a city. It was currently masked by the fog, but I could feel it from where I stood. Once we infiltrate the city and do a proper check of the place, we'll find a way to let the others in. It's important that everyone is careful during the task. I was very careful to put an emphasis on the final point. Inadvertently, I gave Liam a glance, but then I realized that there was no point in doing so because he was no longer the Liam I knew from the past. Even though he was just as lethargic as he had been in the past, he was a lot more alert now and didn't forget anything that was said to him. I double-checked with everyone to make sure that we were all on the same page before turning around and heading for the city. Let's go. Ha 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 ha. The sound of laughter echoed throughout the dimly lit room as the representatives of the demons in the demon domain gathered in a single room. Prince Plintus, or the one in charge of the city Plintus, sat behind a large wooden desk, his features illuminated by the soft glow of the candles that flickered around the room. His piercing gaze was fixed on a small orb that rested in the center of the table, and a wide smile spread across his face as he listened to the voice replaying within it. Let's go sneak into the city and do a proper check of the city before we decide to attack. Once we infiltrate the city and do a proper check of the place, we'll find a way to let the others in. It's important that everyone is careful during the task. The air around the room was jovial, a stark contrast to the tension and fear that had permeated it just a day ago when the demons received the news of the sudden invasion. But now, with Prince Plintus in possession of the powerful artifact given to them by the major heads, the demons felt a newfound sense of confidence. Prince Plintus, it looks like things will be easy for you. One of the demons remarked, grinning from ear to ear. The humans won't know what hit them. Prince Plintus chuckled, a deep rumble emanating from his chest. Now. He fiddled with the orb in his hand. How do the humans say? Don't count the chickens before they hatch. I won't rejoice until they're dead, but... He trailed off, unable to hide the gleeful expression on his face. Another demon laughed. He was a rather lanky demon, and a dreadful aura surrounded them. He was Prince Kuzma, and just like Prince Plintus, he was in charge of one of the 4 major cities. Kuzma City. With his gaze fixed on a small orb in the middle of the table, he laughed again. It's not just the artifact. The humans are truly just. They're practically inviting us in. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the orb in the center of the table. I didn't take them to be this careless. Prince Plintus nodded in agreement, his mind already working out the details of their plan. Let me guess. Prince Kuzma interrupted before he could speak. Now that you know what their plan is, you're going to allow them in and then set up a trap, right? Was I so obvious? Prince Plintus laughed, the sound ringing out like a bell in the otherwise silent room. It looks like I'm easy to see through. How can we not when your expression says it all? As the conversation continued, Prince Plintus couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement building within him. Yes, this is it. With the humans taken care of, he would be able to reinforce the other demons and take care of all the other races at once. The possibilities were endless, and he relished the thought of expanding his power and influence even further. I wonder who I should help after getting rid of the humans. He mused to himself, pressing his hands against the wooden table. Who will benefit me the most? The other demons continued to chatter amongst themselves, but Prince Plintus barely heard them. His mind was consumed with thoughts of the future and the power he would wield once the humans were gone. Tap. 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 He leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming against the table as he plotted and schemed, already looking forward to the day when he would emerge victorious. As if that was already a certainty to him. Chapter 774 Invading the Demon Domain, 3. We're here. When I shut my eyes, I was able to perceive the barrier that blocked my path to the city that was directly in front of me, despite it being invisible from view. Om. I reached out my hand in front of me and stopped when I came into contact with something hard and smooth. I was able to catch a glimpse of a tiny ripple that was forming around the area that I touched, and the ripple, to my relief, stopped moving a couple of meters away from where my hand touched. It's pretty strong. Even though I hadn't put it to the test, I had a hunch that not even someone with an SSS- rank could break through the barrier in a single attack. However, I couldn't say for certain since I hadn't tested it yet. That being said, swoosh. When I shut my eyes and concentrated on a specific energy within my body, the dark hue centered over the palm of my hand, and I brought it forward in a slow, methodical manner. Nothing said that I needed to break the entire structure. Whoom. After the thin film that was surrounding the city was cut cleanly through by my hand, I slowly brought my hand back down. In that short moment, a small cut appeared on the barrier before me. It was small, but it was still there. I can cut it. There was also a fair amount of resistance coming from the barrier, but it was nothing that I was unable to handle in any way. The only issue was that it was a rather slow process, as that single cut took quite a few seconds. When I turned around to look at the others, I was taken aback to see that they had already surrounded me and were attentively observing the area around us. That's good. I smiled at the sight. I had just been considering telling them to cover for me, but it didn't appear as though they required any kind of reminder. With my back secured, I returned my focus to the barrier in front of me, and I brought my hand up. This'll take a couple of minutes. The humans have started to breach the city. What should we do, Your Highness? Nothing for now. On top of a large structure, Prince Plintus was looking in a specific direction as he stood there gazing outward. Even though it wasn't obvious, and there didn't appear to be anything out of the ordinary happening, the prince smiled as he lowered his head and stared at the orb that he held in his hand. Everything was going according to plan. Don't alert the demons patrolling of what's going on. We don't want to startle our guests into thinking this is a trap before it's too late. Understood. The demon is next to the prince replied. Thinking of something, he suddenly asked. Your Highness, what about the other humans? Which ones? The human groups that are surrounding the city outside. What should we do with them? Nothing yet. The images within the orb shifted, and Prince Plintus's eyes squinted at what was replayed inside of it. There were several large groups of humans outside and were all waiting for orders to attack. They were currently hiding their identities with hoods, and although he was unsure of who they were, he wasn't particularly concerned with their identities. He already had a general comprehension of the forces that comprised the human domain, and he was aware that the most difficult opponent was the kid with the blue eyes who was attempting to enter and assist them in infiltrating his city. Just that. They'll never get that chance. The prince smiled and fiddled with the core once more. He was starting to get addicted to it. His gaze eventually came to rest on the human who was tampering with the barrier. Particularly the dark film that was covering his entire body. His gaze changed at the sight. I didn't think we'd have a traitor in our midst. It was clear to him that a demon had betrayed them and had formed a contract with him. Prince Plinitz wasn't sure who the demon responsible was, but he wasn't pleased by the revelation. I'll torture the information out of him once I capture him. In his mind, the 5 of them were already in his grasp. What mattered at the moment was finding out who the demon that had betrayed them was and how he should get the information out of them once he captured them. Get the forces ready to ambush them. As soon as they settle, we'll attack all at once. Prince Plintus commanded, tearing his gaze away from the orb. Make sure you keep the one with the blue eyes alive. Kill the others if need be. Fwop. Flapping his wings once, his figure disappeared. We're in. After what seemed like an eternity, I was finally able to carve out a space that was almost big enough to accommodate a single individual. Well, that'll do. Beads of sweat trickled down the side of my cheek, and I tried to catch my breath. The process was a lot more tiring than I originally anticipated. Here. As I was regaining my strength, I felt a coarse fabric on my face. I didn't need to look to understand what was happening because I immediately recognized the voice. Thanks. After putting away the towel, I noticed Amanda's nose crease ever so slightly as she looked at the towel in her hand. I could tell from a glance that she was somewhat repulsed by the sweat from the towel, but it surprised me that she didn't throw it away as she normally would have done in this situation. Rather, it appeared that after only a few brief seconds, she had returned to her normal self and put the towel away, which was somewhat surprising to me. That neat freak of all people. Can I call that progress? I silently laughed to myself before turning serious once more. Glancing at the others once and meeting their gaze, I nodded my head. Only when all of them reciprocated did I finally enter the barrier. Follow me. Stepping through the barrier, I was brought into a whole new world. The sky was shrouded in thick clouds that blocked out the sun, casting a perpetual gloom over the entire area. The buildings were tall and imposing, made of dark stone and wrought iron. They were lit by flickering gas lamps that cast long shadows across the streets. It looks like just as I've imagined them to be. I mumbled, looking around me in both awe and surprise. The streets themselves were narrow and winding, filled with twisting alleys and dark corners where one could barely see the end. The people who lived here seemed to be a mix of humans and demons, with the demons holding the upper hand in this city. At a glance, everything seemed normal. No. There was a bit of unrest. Most probably from the imminent war that was about to come to them. I was quite certain that they were already aware that we were coming. Swoosh. Swoosh. Within seconds of appearing in the city, Jean, Amanda, and the others appeared behind me. They too seemed rather impressed by the city that lay before their eyes, but that didn't last for long as I managed to gather their attention once more. We've already talked about what we're supposed to do beforehand. I turned my head to stare in the distance where an enormous building stood. It loomed over the surrounding landscape like no other building, its twisted spires reaching toward the sky as if to claw at the very fabric of reality itself. Blackened stone, etched with unholy sigils, made up the bulk of its construction, while jagged obsidian spikes jutted out at irregular intervals, forming an imposing barrier against any would-be intruders. My eyes squinted at the sight of the building. Now that I look at it, it's far more impressive than the Union Tower. The mere sight of the building felt intimidating. Most important, however, was the bright light that shot up from the tip of the building. Mana compressor. Jin's muttering reached my ears. I nodded my head without looking at him. That was our current target, and so long as we managed to destroy it, we'd be able to destroy the barrier that was surrounding the city. As it was directly fueled by the demonic energy derived from the mana in the air, as soon as it vanished, the barrier would lose its fuel source and collapse. When this happened, those waiting outside would be able to directly attack the city. Is everyone here? I did a double take on everyone, and only once I was sure that everyone was present did I let out a short breath and move toward the structure. Just before leaving, my feet paused, and I reminded. Make sure you hide your presence as much as possible. It's important that we reach the tower without getting caught. So long as we didn't get caught. I silently licked my lips. Nothing else needed to be said.